Welcome to the Three Wise Men of Divorce, Money, Psych, and Law podcast. Sit down with the California divorce experts, financial divorce consultant Mark Hill, psychologist Scott Weiner, and attorney Shawn Weber for a frank and casual conversation about divorce, separation, co-parenting, and the difficult decisions real people like you face during these tough times. We know that if you are looking at divorce or separation, it can be scary and overwhelming. With combined experience of over 70 years in divorce and conflict management, we are here for you and look forward to helping by sharing our unique ideas, thoughts, and perspectives on divorce, separation, and co-parenting.
Welcome to the Wise Men of Divorce with Scott Weiner, Shawn Weber, and me, Mark Hill. The holidays are coming up, and that's usually a time for joy and excitement, but we also know that it has other emotions associated with it, like fear and apprehension, especially when there may be a divorce in the offing. So do you deal with that, and how do you deal with the children's questions around that? That's one of the topics we're going to talk about today. The other thing we'd like to chat about is, how do you tell the children that you're going to be getting a divorce? And how do you explain to the children in an appropriate, perhaps age-appropriate way, how this may or may not affect them? Finances, living arrangements, so on and so forth.
That's a lot to talk about, isn't it?
It is indeed.
We can cover that.
We can do it?
We can do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Thanksgiving's right around the corner. Turkey Day, and we don't mean your ex-husband.
Or maybe you do. I don't know.
Or maybe you do. Yeah.
And it's going to be different this year.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just getting divorced, it's going to be different. If you've already been divorced, maybe it hasn't been so good. I mean, a lot of times when it's really fresh, people really struggle to be able to do holidays together. But some people do it.
Last year I cooked for 27 people. This year I think I'm cooking for 3.
Yeah, and so COVID has an impact too.
That's what.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, it certainly drags it in because people have different rules they're applying to themselves, and that can create discomfort with other people, other participants at the dining table.
You know, what I've found for most of my clients is the most discomfort is between the in-laws and the couple. Maybe the couple, the now divorced couple, is okay with doing Thanksgiving together, but then mother-in-law doesn't feel good about it.
Yes.
So how do you thread that needle in a way that the kids don't pick up on conflict and everybody kind of survives that holiday without it being a debacle?
Well, we've talked so many times, we've said so many times that the kids, people say, oh, the kids don't know. The kids don't know. The kids know. The kids know so much more than we give them credit for. They may not have a perfect verbal framework to put it in. They may not know how to describe it, but they know that things have been feeling not wonderful.
It reminds me of a time when I had this couple who just were terrified of telling the children, and they had kids who were, I think, in their early teens. So eventually we help them with a script, what they're going to talk about. They get about 3 or 4 sentences into it after they've announced they're going to get a divorce. The older child, who I think was 14, says, well, we've just been waiting for this, and we wondered what took you guys so long.
And that's the story you hear over and over again.
Yep.
I've heard adult children say they rather have been from a broken home than in one.
That's very true. Yes.
So a lot of times the kids have picked up that there's conflict. I mean, they're feeling your conflict, whether you realize it or not. They're just feeling that energy in the home.
Well, I just did an intake with a couple who, one of the complaints by one of the members is that the other person, will follow this person around in the house and persist in the arguments right in front of the children. Now, these children are quite young, but these kids, they may not know what's going on, but they know that it doesn't feel good.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, this in a way dictates the entry into the discussion. Mom and I, dad and I, that things, get pretty loud around here sometimes, and we don't like it. We think you don't like it either. And we've decided that we're going to change that to make it a little bit better, but, one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to be living in two houses, not one, sometime in the near future. You get an extra house, but you don't get mom and dad in the house fighting at the same time. And, there will be times when kids will say something, kids will break into tears and say, "Do you mean you're getting divorced?" But I would say that that's not as common as kind of I don't know. What I hear is there's almost like a resigned expression, a depression in a way that hits the kids. It's kind of like, oh God. They don't say it like this, but the look on the face, it's almost like they feel like they've failed. Oh, it's our fault. We hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But
the kids thinking it's their fault.
Oh yeah.
Especially if the children have been a focus of conflict between the couple, that enhances that feeling, because they fight over, one parent is more easygoing when it comes to things, and one is more strict rules based, and that they fight about that. And of course, the kids, what do the kids do? Well, they go to the one that's easiest, and that in a way fuels the fire,
But they really do internalize that battle. And that's why we always tell people, in the courts push for this. You've got to shield your kids from the conflict. So I mean, Scott, what kind of damage does that do to kids when they hear negative speaking of the other parent by one of the parents?
There's another part of the structure that this brings to my mind, which is that in most families, when there's more than one kid, it is so common, consciously or unconsciously. It's almost like, well, mom owns Freddie, but daddy owns Susie, And it's like the connection from one kid to the next is very different. And these bring about a form of allegiance to that one parent, and conversely, a form of guilt toward the other one. There's, and as you just both said, something to wit that the kids feel like it's their responsibility. And yeah, they do that. They'll think, well, if I had only been nicer, when daddy said I couldn't play soccer, this might not be happening, and if I'd only said, yes, it was my fault when I got in trouble with Johnny at school, maybe we wouldn't, and the mom and dad were fighting about that, maybe. And the truth, of course, is that I don't know if I've ever heard of a situation where the children actually had anything to do with causing a divorce. I don't think so.
The kids don't cause the divorce. I mean, I have seen cases where you have like, I've seen a lot of these. A child has profound special needs, and maybe severely autistic or something like that, and that does sometimes provide so much stress to the relationship that people don't survive it. I've seen that happen.
And I've seen it where a child is acting out to an incredible degree. Drugs, alcohol, trouble with the law, trouble at school. And the parents take a very different position around that, and that exacerbates a marital situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So Scott, we're having this conversation with the kids then. And
yes,
we're saying, all right, Susie, Susie and Freddie? Is that who they are?
That's interchangeable.
how to what extent does preparation for that meeting help?
Well, at least as I would caption it, tremendously. I think that but as we imagine many divorcing couples, can you imagine them preparing for this discussion?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yes, I can, but not in a positive way, because each of them will want to slant it so that they look like the good guy, because it's always the other, what's fault that the divorce is occurring.
So then how do you slant it? So say we're the parents and our natural inclination is to protect ourselves, right? And I want to look good. I want to look like I'm the good guy. That's kind of a natural inclination. But what's the better way to
So what I've always told clients, and this is not my specialty, so
but you've seen enough divorces.
Yeah, and you could accuse me of the unauthorized practice of psychology if you want. I'll accept that one. But what I've found is that if you focus on what the child's important issues are and start from that standpoint, it makes it easier to craft a statement or a conversation, or start a conversation around it. So what are the kids concerned about? Are they going to be okay? If they're of a certain age, are they going to be able to stay with their friends? What is it going to mean to them? Are they going to be able to stay in the same school? Are they going to be having the same sort of lifestyle? Can they still be on the traveling cheerleader squad? Whatever is their important issue. And it doesn't mean you have to answer yes to all those questions, but that's what they're going to want to know.
Yeah. Even if you say to the child, they ask those things, we're not sure how every detail is going to play out. We're not sure. We haven't worked that part out yet. But mom and I, or dad and I, are going to do everything we can to be sure that you're okay, that you're comfortable, that life changes some, but not in a way that's going to hurt anybody. We're going to take care of you, and we're still both there for you. It's like that needs to be repeated, and then acted on. I mean, as both of you know, many times post-divorce, things don't go sunny. Things, we've all wound up dealing with cases where people during handoff for visitation, where there's problems, it's like, oh my God, on and on and on. Some people won't give up the battle.
Right. And the trouble is, once the money's done, the only thing left to fight about is the poor child or the children. Because once you've got a financial settlement, you can't fight about that anymore. So what's left is just the only point of contact between you two will be your child.
Will be the children. And
yeah.
A lot of times people are afraid of, well, do we have to tell the kids about why we're getting a divorce? What do we have to, like, I don't think it's probably a useful conversation to say, well, Freddie and Susie, I want you to know that we're getting divorced because your father is a complete scumbag and is sleeping with the neighbor.
Right.
I don't think that's a very good conversation. Or we're getting divorced because your mother has become very cold and I have felt the need to go elsewhere for my sexual gratification. Not a good conversation. But more, keeping the adult conversation adult. And really all these kids need to know is that they've got two parents that love them very much. And the marriage is changing, the family is changing because mom and dad's roles are going to be a little different, but they still love you both.
The kids will ask why, though.
Sure.
And they'll ask why separately, especially to the parent who is their ally. And
so what's a good answer?
Well, if we can prevail upon those parents, and we do try in our work, as I know you guys do too, we try to tell them that it really doesn't matter as much that you think your ex is a this or that or the other, or that, he's, chasing skirts with the neighbors, or that she's, hanging out and wherever doing what she's doing. But, sometimes the kids will almost try to unearth those things.
So would it be possible to put it in terms, Scott, of how the child would think about this and explain it in terms, well, remember back when you were in second grade, you had that great friend, of yours, Janie, and then you guys kind of had a falling out and you don't really hang out that much anymore. Do you remember that? Well, that sometimes happens to a mommy and a daddy when they're in a marriage. And so to put it in that context, is that helpful or is that just not?
For a certain age kid, not only is that helpful, it's downright elegant. It's a wonderful thing to do that, to frame that in terms of something that the children can understand. I'm speaking more of the, like the teenager.
Right.
Who is, one kid might be aligned with mom, one kid might be aligned with dad. And it's going to be so tempting for those parents to, basically align in that kind of almost fraternal way with that kid. And it happens all the time.
Yeah. And I think back to when my kids were teenagers, how inherently skeptical they were of every word that came out of their parents' mouths.
I mean, they do that anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. So,
that's true. I mean, that's natural. They're launching. They're trying to find out who they are, and so they're going to give their parents a good, healthy dose of skepticism. But when you
they can't be skeptical when mom and dad say, between themselves, they say, I can't stand you. And the way you're carrying on with, Joe Blow at the, I hate your guts for that. But I tell you what, with Johnny or Freddie and Susie or whoever the hell they are, as much as I can't stand it, I'm going to back you up. And I want you to do the same for me. So it's like with the kids, it's like, what, why are you and daddy doing this? Why are you and mommy doing this? Honey, you've watched us not get along. Like cats and dogs, you've watched us for a period of time. It's like,
yeah,
we're doing this because we want to have a more peaceful life ourselves, but we're still all there for you.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand it's going to be a little different, but there's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's not going to change as much as you think.
So would it be helpful to ask the question, how does it feel for you guys when mommy and daddy have big fights in the house?
You can do that.
Because then, I can't imagine any child that would say, I love it when you guys fight.
It's awesome.
It's
I
awesome.
Pop some
exactly.
Popcorn.
Yeah, really. I'm filming it and putting it on YouTube,
They don't like that.
Exactly. Either. So if you could feed off of that and say, well, that's one of the reasons we think it's not smart for us to stay together.
There's that. There's the marriages that go cold too, where the kids have no clue.
Right.
So you can't really do that, but it's like, you have to be able to make the claim of we're doing this because we think it's best for everybody, including for you, and we know that there will be changes, and change is hard for all of us. None of us likes that, but you're going to be okay. You'll see.
So, you guys, go ahead.
There's one sentence to add to that, and we're going to make you and your welfare the focus. If you could just say that to them in a way that age appropriate and they can understand, I think that can sort of take the valence down.
It's true. Now, okay. So let's get into the real world, people.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So, I mean, it's very nice to talk about how we're all going to get along and kumbaya, and isn't that great? But what if you're married to a terrorist who is going to tell the kids things and is going to try to turn the children against you? What do you do with that person when you're talking to the kids about the divorce?
Okay. You acknowledge it. I know mommy says that I'm, the worst thing that ever happened, but I'm really not. I know she's mad at me. I know she's really mad at me, but we're going to all be okay. And mommy will be too.
Yeah.
But mommy said that you were doing it with the neighbor.
Well, but Mummy gets really angry with Daddy, and I think you've seen that. And when Mummy gets angry, she says all sorts of things. And, you know, I don't agree with all those things she says. And, you know, as you get older, perhaps you'll understand a little more. But right now, all you need to understand is that Mummy and Daddy are going to make you the focus and make sure that you guys are okay. I think if you keep bringing it back to that, the reassurance, it can, you know, not make it right, but make it better, make it tolerable.
I guess what I want to do.
Best it can be. I mean, really,
Yeah.
Shawn's premise is that if you're married, what if you're married to a terrorist? And it's like, well, you know, I mean,
they're going to do what they do.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think, you know, I've had so many clients, I really empathize with this because I'm always telling people, take the high road. Don't drag your children into this dispute. They don't need to know all that stuff, but you don't understand. He's telling them every night how horrible I am. And I have to say something to defend myself. Mm-hmm. And I always just say to him, you know what? You were right to take the high road. Good for you. Keep taking the high road, because what will happen eventually is your children will see.
Yeah.
You know, children, one thing we know is that when you have two, you know, parents and one is profoundly dysfunctional and the other one isn't, just your being you and the children developing their own relationship with both of you, they're going to see what's really going on here most of the time. Now, you do have these situations of like, you have these alienation kind of
gravitate toward the healthier adult anyway.
Yeah. Well, except when you have like a profound alienation situation and then they don't, because they feel less secure in their relationship with the crazier parent, right?
Yes.
So what do you do in that situation?
Oh Lord, you get
lots of therapy, I would imagine.
You get divorced.
Well, honestly, I do tell my clients this. You know, you might want to consider a divorce,
right?
But then the other thing is,
and that's very true. I will always say, and that's why you're divorcing him.
Yeah, but it doesn't change the fact that they feel insecure in their relationship with their child because this person is taking every opportunity to poison that relationship.
Yeah.
And so I always just tell people, you know, you said it, Scott, get lots of therapy, get the kids into therapy so they can have the tools to defend themselves when they're put in these situations.
Shawn, do the legal statements about how you are not to disparage the other parent, do they have any teeth at all ever?
Yeah, I've seen them have teeth. If a judge figures it out that it's happening, the judge tends to punish the person that's behaving badly. But a lot of times it's, you know, there's no custody police.
Yeah.
It's not like Big Brother's going over to your ex-spouse's house to listen to what you're saying, you know, or what the other person's saying. So there's only so much that can be done. And I always think the most important strategy, number one, have those prohibitions in place that we're not going to speak ill of the other parent in the presence of the children. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, just have a strategy of taking the high road, of being the good example. Two wrongs don't make a right. So when you hear, you know, Junior comes home and says, well, Dad says that you've been sleeping with the mailman, you can just respond and say, well, you know, not everything your dad says is entirely correct about these things. I want you to know, especially when they get to be older and they're teenagers, I think it's very appropriate to say, I want you to know that I have made a choice to really take the high road in this case, you know, in our divorce. And I just don't want to speak ill of your father. I'm just not going to do it no matter what he says about me. But I want you to know that I love you very much. Mm-hmm. And let the kid will sort it out. I'm sorry, Scott, I talked over you.
No, I talked over you. And it's like, no, I don't carry on with the mailman. He's very nice, but I don't, you know, I don't do
He's
that.
He's just a friend. I don't like him that way.
But what if you do?
Or what if it's true, right?
If it's true, again, everybody's got their litany of complaints in a divorce. It's seldom on one side, all the complaints are on one side. So the temptation is, well, if she's going to say that about me, guess what? I got my list here and I can go through it. And if she's going to say A, I've got B, C, D, and E ready to go. And that's the danger.
Right. And it's interesting how these two topics, what are we going to do at holidays and what are we going to tell the kids, how closely related they are.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, I mean, now we're talking about Thanksgiving. And where is Thanksgiving going to happen? And how do we tell the kids what's going to happen at Thanksgiving? So if you're among the lucky, what do you think, 10% that can actually get through Thanksgiving without it turning into World War III with your ex-spouse, great, do it. The kids will be grateful that you tried to keep your family a family, even though mommy and daddy aren't married anymore, aren't going to be married anymore. But if you're like most people,
yes,
a healthy dose of reality is important. You know, maybe a self-inventory. Am I going to be able to control my behavior when that person is there?
And says this.
And says that, right?
Right, yeah.
What's going to happen to me? Am I going to be able to get through that meal without it turning into a crap storm? Because the kids will be harmed by the conflict. Don't you agree?
Right.
So we can either ruin Thanksgiving or we can choose to have separate Thanksgivings and the world won't end.
Let me jump in. I see an opportunity in 2020. Thanksgiving can be different and no one's going to think it's weird because of the current pandemic we're in. So maybe there's an out for you.
Yeah, we're going to keep it small this year.
Yeah, exactly. You can understand why.
It's the pandemic.
Exactly.
But I mean, it could also be, you know, like I mentioned this
next year.
I mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, and that was, you know, usually I find that the biggest problem are third parties, you know, the Greek chorus coming in there and really making it crazy for the kids
at the table,
you know, and it's natural for your mother-in-law to lash out at you because you might have done something that upset her daughter, you know, and Mama Bear is going to come in and protect her little girl. You know, I'm just using that as an example.
Yep.
So I mean, that can be, even if the two of you get along great, if the in-laws are a problem, you have to be careful about that. So maybe you take the COVID opportunity and say, well, you know, we're going to have a small Thanksgiving and we're not going to invite extended family because we don't want to kill them with COVID.
Okay, but that's fine for Thanksgiving, but we got Christmas coming up. So what do you do in a case like this that I have going on right now?
That'll be a spike too.
Okay, this is a case that actually a client called me last week. This was an issue because wife has remarried to a very wealthy guy. Husband likes that because he doesn't have to pay a lot of support because she's remarried.
That's awesome. I love that, man.
Except that when it comes to Christmas, the gifts are so disproportionate coming from mom. Dad feels like he's just a loser, and it's like she's trying to do it to him. How do you handle that? We see it all the time, right? Yep.
And well, number one, you don't want to get into a bidding war with your children,
or try to buy them,
in some fashion. It reminds me of a case I had when I first started, where the kids wouldn't go with the mom, and so she was on the corner waving $50 bills at them to convince them to get in the car with her.
I'm just laughing.
It was awful. I mean, it was. Yeah. I mean, you kind of, when you hear it, you kind of want to laugh, but it was really horrible. I mean, it was outside of my office. They were actually doing the exchange at my office, which was a block away from the family court. And I could hear the kids crying out in the street. I could look down from my 8th story window and I could see this going on. I could actually hear them through the sealed glass crying and gnashing of teeth. So I go down to see what's going on, and mom's down there waving $50 bills to try to convince the children to get in the car. They don't want to go with her.
Why didn't they want to go with her? Was she some sort of horrible?
No, it was actually a classic kind of alienation. My client was the dad in this situation, and he had beat the crap out of her. I found out later. And the kids were afraid that if they went with her, that they would get hurt when they got back with dad.
Oh boy.
Wow.
It's a very bad situation.
Yeah.
So most people are not in that circumstance, but like I said, sometimes you're married to a terrorist. So what do you do then? Yep. But you you don't want to be in a situation where you're waving $50 bills at your kids or the Xbox or some, oh, well, dad got me an iPhone. Isn't he awesome?
Right. Or dad's taking us to, Palm Springs for a week,
And the other thing is, dad got me an iPhone. So the question here is, do both parents agree what kind of technology is appropriate for the child?
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that one blow up.
Sure.
Somebody just goes and buys an iPad or an iPod for the kids. And the other parent's like, well, hold on. I was trying to reduce screen time. And then you bought that. And I don't think our child is ready for a phone like that, a device like that. I'd prefer they have a flip phone for now, that kind of thing. But then the other parent bought the phone. Sometimes this happens. They bought the phone because they wanted to have a way to communicate with their child, and mom was keeping the communication from happening. So, I mean, these kinds of things can blow up and can bleed into Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrate. And that's not cool, So what is a way around that? What is a way to prevent these kind of fiascos from happening?
Talk to each other.
It's the same answer for everything we've talked about today.
Talk to each other.
Yeah. Well, it's also impossible in some circumstances for the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't have that communication because you don't have that trust, there's almost no starting point for any one of these things.
Yeah. So you have to self-regulate, don't you?
Well, I mean, that's basically the heart and soul of our collective work, which is that we engage in putting these people putting a challenge to them of making it their mission to engage in this process in a way that's better than the marriage they've been in, Yeah. And it's like, making this a positive as we can get it to be inflection point so that even if the marriage has had its horrors, at least the divorce doesn't have to, and their children relationships don't have to. And we've, I know that we could, we can't divulge individual names here or whatever, but we could each name the times when we have failed to do that. And
for sure,
it sure wasn't for lack of our trying, but we just don't have the power. If people are dead set on terrorizing, Shawn, you called it being a terrorist, and it doesn't necessarily have to be being a physical terrorist. It can be, just psychologically making it impossible to move on in peace, to give each other the benefit of the doubt, even when they have it coming. And we've seen that too, where people are unfairly adhering to negative horrors. If people are loyal to that, we can't really help that.
And as a financial guy, I see that when these sort of challenges occur, it's a huge cost escalator. I mean, we can get them through, and it's maybe triage, and it may not be satisfactory. It may not be what we hoped for them, but we can get the deal done. However, the damage that's done in getting the deal done is often very unnecessary.
So that's
and
interesting.
Could have been short-circuited.
Yeah, I mean, I was focused on the psychological damage, but there really is a financial damage here.
Yeah.
It can be in the terms of failing to cooperate means you're paying more lawyers.
Yep.
It can be in terms of failing to cooperate means that you're having a bidding war over holiday gifts. And you're making choices that are just ridiculous for your family finances, but you feel like you have to so that you can keep the kids on your side.
And when this conflict is really intense, I have found even in alternative dispute resolution meetings, it's totally disruptive because the couple come wanting an arbiter to kind of, throw a flag.
Somebody that can be a judge, a tiebreaker.
A referee. That was an appropriate yellow flag,
Well, I mean, they can do that. Like if it is so bad, you can actually hire a parenting coordinator, which Scott, I know you can do that. I've done it before, where you can be the arbitrator. You can be the one that says, okay, yellow flag, you're not doing that. Or here's what the holiday schedule is going to be this week. If you're that far gone that you can't work together.
Right.
By all means, hire get a parenting coordinator, because it could really reduce the costs of ongoing litigation. I mean, I used to make a ton of money right around the holidays over holiday visitation time.
Yep.
So, I've been making a list here. Let's see what you guys think of my list of common threads of when you're talking to the kids about the divorce, when you're interacting with your children as a couple, even after the divorce, and then when you're doing parenting, this list kind of jumped out at me. Number one is communicate, right? Mm-hmm. We agree on that. You have to absolutely have communication and be clear about what you're intending to do. And then as part of that communication, if you can pull it off, agree on a set of governing values for how your co-parenting is going to be. Would you agree with that, gentlemen?
Yeah. Yes. And also how you're going to communicate.
And how you're going to communicate, not just the fact that we're going to, but how and what time.
What are the rules?
I always say you want a SMART agreement. It needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. Mm-hmm. SMART. That comes from goal setting theory, right? And so when you're talking about setting a goal for communication, we need to be specific about exactly what we're going to talk about and when. And what method are we going to use for the communication? Are we going to use an email account? Are we going to use fax, carrier pigeons, smoke signals? How are we going to communicate, and when is it going to happen? And then the other thing is, if you can reduce conflict and you can do these holidays together, you can have these communications with your children together, great, right? Mm-hmm. But it sounds like, from what we've been talking about, if you can't do that, you need to be realistic about what you're capable of doing as a couple. Are you capable of co-parenting in a way that is non-conflictual, or will your interactions in front of the children always be negative for the children? And if that's the case, be realistic about it, then set a plan where you're not together when you have these events. Did I miss anything, guys?
No. Well, we can always add to the list.
Always add, but
they can be interminable. But you've hit the high points, and
there's nothing wrong with any of that. That's for sure.
And if you make that the focus, what will come from that is you start to build new muscles.
Thank you. Yes.
You have a new muscle to work with your spouse that you didn't have before, and the more you do it, the stronger that muscle will become. And I've had people who've been able to develop that during the case say to me at the end, if we'd had these tools before, we might have stayed married.
Yeah, I've had that happen too. I've actually seen people reconcile over that.
I have too. Yep. Only in one case in 20 years, but I had one
where they figured out that they needed a binder between the two of them that would pass between them with the child, where they would talk about homework and sports and discipline issues. And that binder saved their marriage. They ended up going back to their therapist and not getting divorced because they've finally figured out a way that they could communicate in a way that wasn't threatening.
Yep.
And that's the thing. You got to take the charge out of the communication. There is a temptation to want to bring your conflictual charge to the communication over your children and bring your hurt, your anger, your fear to the table with your spouse that you're trying to divorce when you're talking about parenting your children. But that charge can be super damaging. So I'm always telling people, just take the charge off of it, pretend like you're Spock. Here's what your proposal is. I mean, what do you think, Scott? I see you laughing over there.
Well, okay.
Easier said than done.
Well, there is that. But we never assumed it wasn't easier said than done. That goes with this territory. We're assuming this is all difficult. If it hadn't been difficult, everybody would do it, and none of us would have a job, right? Right.
Yeah, so, true.
I'm thinking more about how the stylistic elements invade every method. And I watched that today while I was at work dealing with a new group of people. And when one person posed some facts that were difficult facts for that person about the other one, instead of the other one kind of staying in that discussion, even making excuses or justifications that related to that, they shifted ground and said, well, but then you did, it's sort of like, and I said, wait a second, one subject at a time. You can dispute that, but this other thing about how terrible the other person is for some other reason is kind of not relevant, is it?
But it's sometimes why they come to us, because they are so convinced that we can provide justice for all. If we just listen to the story, we will pick their side and know that they have been wronged and that they should be supported and the other person punished.
Well, and then as the prince says, in Romeo and Juliet, all are punished. All are punished. And it's like, yes, we all are, but it's, you have to pay the price of listening and working things out fairly, or folks, you wind up in our offices.
Well, and something I probably should have added to the list that I forgot, which is the most important thing. And that is that the children are the priority.
Yeah.
And so say you're divorcing somebody that's a jerk or a terrorist. Do you want that conflict to then harm your children?
It's the old question, isn't it? What story do you want your children to tell about their parents' divorce when they grow up?
Exactly. Do you want it to be mom and dad, boy, they took the high road and we just didn't feel their conflict and they kept us out of it. And we could tell that we just had two parents that really put us first. Or do you want it to be, oh my gosh, every Thanksgiving was a nightmare. I dreaded every holiday because I knew there was going to be a fight.
Yep.
I dreaded sunrise.
Yep.
Right? I mean, and people, this, Scott, people develop lifelong emotional issues as a result of how their parents were when they were children.
It's true. It goes back. It's generational. It goes, oh my, oh my, oh my.
Well, and it could be maybe if I'm looking at a divorce, I could think, well, this is what happened with my parents. And there's all these things that happened when I was a child that caused us to be where we are. And in my spouse's childhood, but we can stop that. We can stop the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully.
Well, we can have stopping the cycle as a goal.
It's not easy.
Yeah,
that we can do.
It can be aspirational. And
if you never set a goal, then you just, what is that? He who fails to plan plans to fail.
Yep.
That sounds cute. Nice flippy.
You like that? It's a little
palindromic. I used that when I was a financial planner. I used to say people never plan to fail. They just fail to plan financially.
Oh my goodness.
But it's true.
It is true. I mean, you got to think with the end in mind. So that could be a whole other podcast, thinking with the end in mind.
That's true.
Yeah. But our time is kind of up, gentlemen.
We could keep going. This is a good conversation.
Mark, how do they get to you?
They would go to my website. I am a certified financial planner, certified divorce financial analyst. Go to pacdivorce.com, PACDIVORCE, and we have all our contact information there.
My name is Scott Weiner, and these two guys have been beating on me to have my own website, but I don't. So if you want to reach me, I'm a psychologist and attorney, and you would call me on the telephone. Remember that thing? There's this thing, you push the buttons with the numbers on it. I answer my own phone too. 619-417-5743. And
you have a rotary phone, right?
Any kind of phone will work. That's funny though. No, it's the crank. Hello.
Tin
Don,
can.
sir.
It's a tin can plugged into the internet. Well, if they want to get a hold of me for whatever their dispute is, they can go to WeberDisputeResolution.com. That's Weber with one B, DisputeResolution.com. Well, guys, we did it again. We burnt another, 40 minutes.
Something.
Dispensing our wisdom or lack thereof.
Something like that. Good to see you again, gentlemen.
And we would love to hear from our listeners if they have any topics that they would like us to address. We usually, about half an hour before this, have a panicked call or a conversation amongst us as to what we're going to talk about. So we love the concept of topics we're not coming up with. If you can come up with something, please send it.
All right. I wish everybody the best. Enjoy your turkey.
Good holiday to all.
We'll talk next week.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Three Wise Men of Divorce: Money, Psych, and Law. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share with others who may be in a similar place. Until next time, stay safe, healthy, and focused on a positive, bright future. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Every family law case is unique, so no legal, financial, or mental health advice is intended during this podcast. If you need help with your specific situation, feel free to schedule a time to speak with one of us for a personal consultation.